All right, what's up, nerds? This is Cam. I'm going to keep working on my custom inspector today, where I'm putting different classes and their properties into a reorderable list. I'm going to start by fixing a couple problems we had in the last episode, and then I'm going to just make them look a little nicer and work on organization. So the first thing I want to show you is I just made a quick class here. It just plays like a list of particle systems or whatever, but the important part in it is that it has a list. And if you put a list into our custom inspector right now, it works fine. You see there's 3 elements here in my particle system, and here it displays all 3 elements. But if I click this toggle on and off, it doesn't hide the children, which is a little bit annoying. And then another problem we have is that if I change any of these values, they don't actually get updated. So they're pretty easy to fix, but it's just something we gotta do to start. So I'm gonna jump into my custom inspector here. And then the first thing that I'm going to do is just add one line of code at the bottom of my draw element call, which is right here. And then I'm just going to say that my serialized object, and I'm going to apply my modified properties. So everything that I change in this serialized object while this is being drawn, I'm going to update those changes. And then another thing that I can add is when I get this object, I can say element object dot update, and that's supposed to get like the newest like any property changes that have happened to this object, just to be on the safe side. It's I've never had a problem not having it in, but I don't know, people say to have it in, so who am I to disagree? But now if we go back and I change any of this, I set my overheat timer to 10, now it updates. So I don't even know what that was. My overheat, obviously, actually. So now if I go into my overheat, it's set at 10. So that's pretty nice. And then the other thing is the list toggle. So if I find my script here, so basically what this is doing is I'm setting this bool to be true, which is saying that I want you to step into all the children, which we need it to be true to display that list at all, and just even to get into the first properties, which are children. But we don't want it to be true when that toggle is false. So there's a simple way to do that. We can say bool ShowChildren, and ShowChildren, and we'll set that to true to start, and then we'll put ShowChildren as our next visible parameter. And then here we can get our property from our property iterator, and we'll say if it is an array, so we'll put this in an if statement. So if it is an array and if it has children, we'll set ShowChildren to equal our property iterator is expanded. So is expanded just returns the state of that toggle. So is it on or off, which is true or false, just like a bool. So then if it's false, ShowChildren will be false, and then it won't step into the children for that array. But then if it gets to another array and it is expanded as true, it'll update ShowChildren, and then it will step into that array. So that should work nicely. But we have to do this. We have to do this in height and in our draw as well. So here we can say bool ShowChildren. Set this to be ShowChildren, and update ShowChildren here. Oh, and set this to be true. And then we can update this if property iterator is array, property iterator is expanded, and that's going to be what ShowChildren is equal to. And there we go. So that should work nicely. We can just double check here. Perfect. So yeah, that works perfectly. So that's great. So now we can start doing a bit of our own organization. So I can say, what do I want to do first? Let's update mix and base here. Okay, so I still have these in. So I've added in 2 bools here. So I have ShowInfo and ShowMixin, and I set them to be hide and inspector. And it's nice to have them as hide and inspector, because I'm only going to be using them from my custom inspector. And then they won't show up in here as parameters, like name does. there's probably a better way to do this. I could probably create a serialized class that's like mixin info that would have the name and these two bools in it, and then a reference to a mixin base, and then have my reorderable list be a list of that. But just for the sake of this video, I'm going to keep it simple, and I just thought of that, so maybe I'll do it another time. What I can do is I can get those properties for those bools and then update them and use that to change how I'm displaying their specific classes in the list. So let's start with ShowInfo. We can make our own toggle similar to the list toggle. So we'll do that after name, which is here. Okay, so then we can say the first thing we're going to do is get that bool so that we can set it off the toggle. So we'll say element object dot find property, and the property we're looking for is ShowInfo, and we know it's a bool, so we can get the bool value from it, and the bool value is going to equal our toggle. So a toggle is actually a bool, but a fold out is that arrow that folds up and down, which looks a little nicer for this kind of thing. So we'll call it a editor GUI fold out. And fold out takes a rect, a bool, and a label. So we can say the rect is rect.x, not rect.y. We actually want line height space, because that'll shift us down one, because this is the y position. And then we want rect.width, and the height is going to be line height, not light height, line height. And that has to be a new rect, sorry. And there we go. And then it needs to take a bool and a label. So we'll give it the bool that we're updating here, because then it's going to set the initial value of the fold out to be this bool, and then it'll update this bool if it changes. So that'll work fine here. So it's the same, that show info parameter that we're finding, and then for the label we'll just call it info. And that'll work fine. And then what we can do with the same bool value we have here is where we go through and iterate all our properties here. We can just wrap that in an if statement. So we'll say if that bool is true, we can do all this. We can search through and find all our properties. And then actually we're gonna have to do the same thing for our height, because we want our height to adjust if we're showing less properties. So if we pop in here, we can just wrap this whole thing in an if statement. Oh, you know what? Okay, not quite the whole thing actually. Yeah. So we need these serialized element and serialized element object to be able to find this property. So we have to take those outside, and then we actually have to take int I outside as well, because we need to reference that, so that we can do line height space times I. And we should start I at 2 now, because info is going to take up another line. So we're going to start I as 2 now here. So basically as many like static parameters as we have, we'll set I to start at that. And that should work fine. So if we pop into fire logic, it didn't work fine at all. Okay, sorry. So it has to be rect.y plus line space height, because we need the height of that element plus 1 line. So that was just an oversight there. But now if we go in, we have all these info toggles here, and we can turn these on, and then it's a little more organized, because we don't have to we can just have the ones open that we're working on or that we need to see right now. And then we just have the names here, so we can just see which one is which, and then open up the parameters when we need them. So it's a little cleaner. It's kind of nice. So now what we can do is kind of remove the classes being shown at the bottom of this inspector, because we have all the info we're going to need from these classes here, but we still need the components on the game object here. But we can basically hide them and then trigger them on and off if we need to see them for whatever reason. But for the most part, we'll be able to access all the information we need just from this reorderable list here. we can go about this by creating a bool that we can toggle on and off in our reorderable list. So we're going to find our bool show mixin here from our mixin base, and we're going to use that property. So an easy way to do that is just create a property field. And our property field is going to take a rect. So we're going to make a new rect, and I'm going to put this one beside our name, so just to the right of it. So an easy way to do that is just do rect.width, which gets us all the way to the right side, and then we'll minus 80, because that's just a number that I came up with testing this, and you can play around with your own numbers for however you like to organize it. But that's going to put us 80 from the right side. So then we can just do rect.y, which will put us on the top line, and then for our width we can just put 80 pixels, and we want it to be line height. And then that'll be fine. The only thing we need to change in the rect here for our name is we'll minus 80 from that, so there's no overlap. And then so that's our rect there. So then we need to give it just a property new rect. Oh, there we go. Sorry, just bracket issues. So now we need to give it a property. So we're going to do element object dot find property, and we're going to find the property of show mixin, and that should be all we need there. So if we pop back, then we get I know why the little toggle is popped off, because the label has its own width, that show mixin label, but we can override that. So if we go right above our property field here, we can just do editor GUI utility label width, and I'm going to set the label width to be not 90, 70 here, but then I don't want to override all of the label widths, so then I can go editor GUI utility label width equals 0, and when you set this to 0, it just sets it back to the defaults for all the different kinds of parameters in their labels. So yeah, so that works good, and now I can turn show mixin on and off, and it doesn't do anything right now, but at least we can edit this bool, which is a hidden property, so you can't actually edit it from even the class itself, but we can edit it from our custom inspector, which is nice. So now I'm gonna actually make it that it turns these mixins on and off, and there's probably a couple ways I could tackle that. I could probably write a custom inspector for each one that reads off that bool, but I'm gonna do it kind of a quick and easy way here. Because we have a reference to call mixin actions, right? So I can just iterate through each component on it, or each element in its action mixins list. So I'm just going to make a quick for loop here. Call mixin action mixins dot count. So now we can iterate through all of the action mixins, which is, or all of the mixin bases that are in action mixins, which is the class that we're overriding here, and then say that if our call mixin action dot action mixins action mixins at I is, if its show mixin is equal to false, we can hide it in the inspector. And to hide it in the inspector, we'll just grab it. So we're grabbing the component, and then we're saying hide flag, and the hide flag is equal to a enum here called hide flags, hide in inspector. Yeah, hide in inspector. And then we can say else. So if it's true, we can say hide flags dot show none. So we want no hide flags. We want no hide flags, sorry. And you could say, you could even do something like this and just put another parameter here. So if its hide flag equals hide flags dot none, and then I guess we could do something else for the else, just so that it's not always running if it doesn't have to. So else if it is true, if show mixins is true, and the hide flag equals hide in inspector, and that should work fine. So then if we pop in here onto our fire logic, so you can't see, so all our mixins are gone. So now, like, our inspector here looks way nicer. Like if you have everything closed, like this is way smaller and it still has all of those components on it that used to be on it. And when you get like 20, 30 mixins on a game object here, this is way nicer. But now, like if I want to see what's going on with overheat for some reason, I can just click this show mixin and then check overheat pops up down here, which is great. That's pretty organized right there. There's one last thing I want to do. It's really quick. Just one thing I noticed that I didn't like is when I click check overheat here in my regular list inspector, so in action mixins in the default inspector draw, when I click it, it pings the game object, which is nice. But when I click this, it actually pings the script, which is also nice if I want to find the script. But I also want a reference to where that game object is in the scene. Like all of these are on the same game object, but often that's not going to be the case. But it's really easy to write your own object here. So we just need, instead of a property field, we're going to write an object field. So we can do that. Let's do that in our info maybe. So after ShowInfo here, we can do object field, or sorry, editor GUI, object field, and object field is going to take a rect. So we're going to do new rect, and this is going to be rect.x, or sorry, lowercase r, rect.x, and then this is going to be rect.y, but then 2 lines down because we have the name and the info toggle above it. So we're going to do times line height space times 2. So that'll set our Y position 2 lines down with spacing. So that'll work fine. And then we want rect.width. It keeps capitalizing my R here. Rect.width and line height. And I'm not sure why I'm getting errors here. The name rect does not exist in the current const. Oh, I'm in the line. I'm in the element height callback. That's why I was capitalizing my R. So I'm going to go up to I just copied that, and I'm going to go up to the in the show info toggle in my draw element callback. So then I can just do that same thing. Now everything will work fine. And then it just needs a reference to a serialized object. So I can just give it, or no, a serialized property, sorry. So I can just give it a serialized property, and it'll return the object associated with that property. And that's all we need. We'll actually change our eyes to 3 because now there's 3 elements above it. So I is 3, and actually it's only, so I'm just going to put one I++ in this if statement, because if show info isn't shown, then I is only 2 for this, but I is declared in show info here, so that's fine. So now if I pop back, that's here, but my object is not. It's rect.y plus line height space times 2, not multiplied by. And there we go. So it's called element 0 right now, which isn't very nice, but it pings our game object, which is great. And then I can override the label, I'm pretty sure. If I can find it right here. Rect position. GUI content label. So we can do new GUI content, and we'll say object. And there you have it. So that's all the info we're ever going to need. It's our entire game object is cleaned up. We have total control over everything. That's super nice. So that's I'm going to leave it here for today. I've been doing custom inspectors for way too long. But maybe tomorrow I will get these functionality behind these buttons. So I'll put a nice drop down in on the plus button, and it'll give you options to add any of these mixins and handle it all automatically, or just, and the remove button's relatively simple. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.